What I fear if Sara Duterte becomes president. I have been writing about Philippine politics long enough to know when fear is irrational and when it is earned. This is the earned kind. This is not a smear piece. This is not partisan cheerleading for the other side. This is a reckoning with evidence, with audited documents, congressional records, ICC filings, and a behavioral trail that Sara Zimmerman Duterte Carpio has left across more than a decade of public life. She has formally declared her candidacy for the 2028 presidential election, and she is currently leading the polls. So the question I cannot stop asking is this: what happens to the rest of us if she wins? The answer, as best as I can piece it together from the facts available, is not a comfortable one. The picture that emerges, when assessed against the available evidence, is one of institutional regression, democratic rollback, fiscal recklessness, geopolitical vulnerability, and the entrenchment of warlord-style dynastic rule at the national level. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. This principle, foundational in behavioral psychology, holds that the most reliable way to anticipate how a person will act under a given set of conditions is to examine how they have acted under similar conditions before. People do not fundamentally change their decision-making patterns when power increases, they reveal them more completely. Sara Duterte has already governed. She has already handled public money, faced accountability mechanisms, responded to legal pressure, and made foreign policy statements. That record is not a rough draft. It is the evidence. Part 1. The blueprint already exists, her track record. Financial stewardship, a pattern of opacity and misuse. The most concrete and factually documented dimension of Sara Duterte's governance style is her relationship to public funds. The evidence is not circumstantial. It is audited, congressional, and prosecutorial in nature, and it forms an indisputable behavioral pattern. During her tenure as vice president and concurrent DepEd secretary, Duterte received a total of at least 737.5 million pesos in confidential funds. 125 million for the office of the vice president in 2022, 500 million for the OVP in 2023, and 112.5 million allocated for the Department of Education in 2023. The Commission on Audit disclosed that the OVP's 125 million pesos in confidential funds for 2022 was exhausted in just 11 days, which immediately raised alarm among lawmakers. The COA flagged 237 million pesos in expenditures, 73 million in 2022, and 164 million in 2023 as highly irregular. Perhaps most damning, the DepEd's own finance unit admitted it was not involved in the process of utilization and liquidation of the secret funds, and recorded them as liquidated based only on a cover letter. The impeachment complaint endorsed by 215 and eventually 240 House members cited 254.9 million pesos in ghost expenses, disbursements listed under names that could not be verified in official civil registries, with fabricated or incomplete details. In December 2025, plunder and graft charges were formally filed against Duterte and 15 others before the Office of the Ombudsman, citing 612.5 million pesos in contested confidential funds. A separate complaint, filed in January 2026 by former Senator Sonny Trillanes and the group The Silent Majority, cited an estimated 650 million pesos in misused confidential funds from both the OVP and DepEd. The research group IBON notes that the pattern of financial misconduct did not begin with her OVP tenure. Between 2006 and 2015, approximately 2 billion pesos was allegedly amassed in joint bank accounts maintained by Sara Duterte and her father, an amount vastly disproportionate to her net worth of approximately 7.25 million pesos, as declared in her 2007 SALN. While these are allegations yet to be fully adjudicated, the trajectory they suggest is consistent with the audited irregularities of her OVP and DepEd tenures. If this pattern is extended to the national level, to the entire executive branch, the national budget, and the Philippine Development Plan, the fiscal consequences would be catastrophic. A president who exhausted classified funds in 11 days without accountability, who diverted education funds away from a sector with a shortage of 165,443 classrooms and deteriorating school infrastructure, and who faces plunder charges for the misuse of over 612 million pesos, offers a reliable preview of how the country's finances would be managed at the highest level of power. Accountability and allergic reaction to scrutiny. Sara Duterte's responses to accountability measures have been as revealing as the financial irregularities themselves. When House investigators pressed her on fund utilization, she did not provide documentation. Instead, she accused her questioners of political motivation and described herself as a punching bag used to conceal government corruption. She attempted to block her first impeachment trial through the Supreme Court, successfully, as the SC declared the first impeachment articles unconstitutional in July 2025, and filed another petition with the Supreme Court in April 2026 to halt the next round of impeachment proceedings. Her most notorious display of unaccountability came in November 2024, when she publicly declared in an expletive-filled pre-dawn online press conference that she had contracted someone to kill President Marcos, First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos, and Speaker Martin Romualdez if she herself were assassinated. When asked if she regretted the statement, she said, "No, buti na yung alam nila," meaning, "It's good that they already know." The Department of Justice opened an investigation, and the National Bureau of Investigation probed potential violations of the Anti-Terrorism Act. The Philippine National Police also filed complaints for direct assault and grave coercion, though these were later dismissed by the Quezon City Prosecutor's Office in January 2025 for insufficient evidence. None of these deterred her. Even her language around impeachment is instructive. When business groups called for a prompt Senate trial to uphold public accountability, Duterte responded that impeachment is not about accountability, a statement that drew immediate condemnation from constitutional lawyers and Mindanao-based legal organizations who pointed out she fundamentally misrepresented the purpose of the impeachment clause. Former presidential spokesperson Edwin Lasierda, who served under President Benigno Aquino III, characterized Sara as more unpredictable than ex-President Duterte, a man who famously threatened to kill drug suspects on live television. The behavioral pattern is clear. Accountability is something to be evaded, litigated against, or reframed as political persecution. A president who holds this view, with full executive power at her disposal, would effectively immunize herself and her allies from any institutional check. This is not speculation. This is what her documented record predicts. The violence reflex. The sheriff punching incident of July 2011 is sometimes dismissed as a relic of Sara's early political career. But its meaning goes beyond the incident itself. As mayor of Davao City, Duterte physically assaulted a court sheriff for insisting on carrying out a legal demolition order, an act of enforcing a court ruling, and was reprimanded by the Office of the Ombudsman. She issued a public apology nearly a year later. The significance is not the punch. It is the instinct. When an institution of law crossed her will, her response was physical violence. The Ombudsman warned that a repetition of the incident will be dealt with more severely, a warning that her subsequent career history suggests she never internalized. Part 2. Political Governance. The Warlord Model at the National Level. The Duterte Dynasty as Template. To understand what a Sara Duterte presidency would look like, one must understand what Davao City looks like. The Duterte family has governed Davao City almost continuously since 1988. After Sara served as vice mayor and then mayor, her brother Sebastian took the mayoral seat. And in the 2025 midterm elections, the entire family swept Davao's local races. Rodrigo Duterte won mayor by a landslide with 662,630 votes, while detained at The Hague facing crimes against humanity charges, and was proclaimed mayor by the Board of Canvassers. Sebastian won vice mayor. Paulo Duterte won as the city's first district representative. Paulo's son Omar won as the second district representative. This is the political model Sara Duterte would bring to Malacanang. Not a democratic administration, but a dynastic one, where loyalty to the family overrides institutional mandates, where local offices become personal properties, and where succession is intra-family rather than electoral. By 2025, approximately 80% of Philippine provincial governors belonged to fat dynasties, and dynastic representation in the House of Representatives had risen to 67%. Political scientists have documented a direct link between dynastic governance and poverty, with research from Ateneo de Manila finding that the negative impact of dynasties on development is concentrated in non-Luzon provinces, encompassing the Visayas and Mindanao. A Sara presidency would not resist this trend. It would sanctify it from the apex of national power. Impunity as governing philosophy. Under Rodrigo Duterte's administration, impunity was elevated from a recurring problem to a governing method. The drug war resulted in at least 6,000 official deaths, with human rights groups estimating up to 30,000 killed. Amnesty International described the administration as one that incited a wave of extrajudicial executions and fueled a climate of near-absolute impunity for perpetrators. 20 journalists were killed during Rodrigo Duterte's presidency, according to Reporters Without Borders. After he left office, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against him for the crime against humanity of murder, citing killings perpetrated from November 2011 through March 2019. The period covered includes Sara's own tenure as Davao City Mayor. Sara herself has been named as a secondary respondent in that ICC case. A confessed member of the Davao Death Squad, Arturo Las Canas, testified that during Sara's first term as mayor, from 2010 to 2013, DDS members sought her clearance on whether to continue the extrajudicial approach. According to Las Canas, she personally met with them and agreed to continue the killings. Sara categorically denies the allegations, but the death toll in Davao did not decline during her tenure. The historical precedent from the Rodrigo Duterte era shows that once a culture of state-sanctioned impunity is institutionalized, it is extraordinarily difficult to dismantle. Under a Sara Duterte administration, with Duterte family allies holding multiple Senate seats and dynastic networks controlling local governments, the conditions for a renewed, legitimized cycle of extrajudicial violence and the suppression of dissent would be firmly in place. Red tagging, civil society, and the weaponization of anti-communism. As DepEd Secretary, Sara Duterte red-tagged the Alliance of Concerned Teachers, a legal organization, for supporting a transport strike, linking them to the Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army without due process. The ILO received a complaint about the red tagging, and their investigation found that linking trade unions to insurgency has wrongly linked trade union activity to lawbreaking and overthrowing the state. The Commission on Human Rights condemned the carte blanche act of red tagging by elected officials, noting it leads to worse forms of violence, such as enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. Red tagging under her father's administration was a precursor to targeted killings. Under a Sara presidency, with the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict at her disposal, an apparatus she was already embedded in as DepEd Secretary, civil society organizations, labor unions, progressive media, and human rights groups would face a dramatically heightened threat environment. The 2025 Media Freedom Report noted that from 2022 to 2025, attacks against media workers totaled 184 cases, a 44% increase over the Duterte period. Under a Sara administration that has already shown contempt for legal accountability, this number is unlikely to improve. Part 3. The Economy. Systemic mismanagement at scale. A treasury under threat. The Philippine economy grew at 5.6% in 2024, though short of government targets. The World Bank trimmed its growth forecast in late 2025, citing lower domestic investment, weak business confidence, declining foreign direct investment, and domestic political shocks. A Sara Duterte presidency would aggravate every single one of these structural weaknesses. Her documented approach to public finance, opaque disbursements, funds exhausted in days without audit trails, ghost beneficiaries, scaled to presidential governance, would undermine the fiscal consolidation that international creditors and investors require. The education sector, which she directly governed, offers a microcosm. Despite allocating hundreds of millions in confidential funds, the Philippines retained a classroom shortage of 165,443 during her tenure. Without new construction or maintenance, only 18.6% of classrooms would remain in good condition by 2040, according to the EDCOM 2 PIDS study. Part 4. The West Philippine Sea and Geopolitics, the Territory at Risk, the Pattern of China Accommodation. The most strategically consequential dimension of a Sara Duterte presidency is the trajectory she would set for the West Philippine Sea, and by extension, for the U.S.-Philippine Security Alliance, ASEAN's coherence, and Southeast Asian geopolitics. She declared that the WPS dispute does not make up the entire relationship with China. She called for resolving Chinese incursions through diplomatic channels rather than military assertion, opposed the deployment of the U.S. Typhoon missile system in northern Luzon, and warned against leaning toward a foreign power. Critically, she gave her most expansive foreign policy interview not to a Philippine outlet, but to RT, formerly Russia Today, the Kremlin-funded media outlet that Beijing aligns with rhetorically. Derek Grossman, a senior defense analyst at RAND, assessed in Foreign Policy that any revisiting of her father's foreign policy is very likely to be met with deepening concern among the United States and its allies. The real concern is not that Sara would pursue genuine non-alignment, but that she would follow her father in implementing deliberately pro-China actions. Rodrigo Duterte entered into a secret verbal agreement with Xi Jinping to maintain a status quo on disputed territories. He pursued joint exploration arrangements with China, threatened multiple times to abrogate the U.S. Visiting Forces Agreement, and allowed China to build and fully militarize artificial islands in the South China Sea without meaningful protest. Marcos responded by strengthening the U.S. alliance, expanding the EDCA framework to 9 bases, and forging a trilateral alliance with the U.S. and Japan. A Sara presidency would undo this entire diplomatic architecture. The West Philippine Sea sits over significant energy resources, with upper-range estimates projecting up to 5.4 billion barrels of oil and 55.1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. A Sara Duterte presidency that reverts to the diplomatic channels-only posture would effectively cede these sovereign rights and economic resources without a shot being fired. For a nation already struggling with an energy deficit, poverty, and food security concerns, surrendering claim to these resources for the sake of Beijing's goodwill is not neutrality. It is strategic surrender. Part 5: Democratic Institutions, Erosion and Collapse. Under Rodrigo Duterte, Philippine institutions suffered systematic degradation. ABS-CBN, the country's largest broadcast network, was forced off the air after Congress refused to renew its franchise. Maria Ressa, co-founder of Rappler, was arrested twice. The legal system was weaponized against opposition figures, most notably Senator Leila de Lima, who was imprisoned on drug charges that critics and international observers widely viewed as politically motivated. Under a Sara presidency, these same institutional levers would be available not merely to defend herself, but to suppress political opposition. Part 6: The Warlord State, Dynasty Entrenched Nationally. When the family becomes the state, the concept of a warlord state in Philippine political science refers to a governance structure in which local strongmen, backed by private armies, business monopolies, and political networks, operate with de facto sovereignty within their territories. What a Sara Duterte presidency would represent is the completion of a process, the installation of a warlord family at the apex of the national state. Under a Sara Duterte presidency, the executive, key legislative seats, and local governments across Mindanao would be aligned under a single political family and its client network. The anti-dynasty provision of the 1987 Constitution has never been implemented because Congress has never enacted the enabling law. Sara would have neither the incentive nor the ideological inclination to change this. She would, in fact, be its greatest beneficiary. Part 7: The Broader Picture, What the Philippines Could Look Like. Drawing from her documented behavioral patterns. A Sara Duterte presidency would most likely exhibit the following characteristics. Public finances would be managed with the same opacity that defined her OVK and DepEd tenures. Confidential fund allocations across the executive branch would expand without corresponding audit mechanisms. Civil liberties would be under sustained pressure. Red tagging of activist groups, labor unions, progressive media, and political opponents would intensify. Political opposition would be fragmented and suppressed. A Sara presidency would use the full arsenal of executive power to weaken political competitors. The experience of Senator Leila de Lima under Rodrigo Duterte is a template, not an anomaly. The judiciary faces the greatest institutional risk, a president who views the courts as instruments to be recruited rather than independent arbiters of the law, would seek to reshape the judiciary's composition through strategic retirements and loyalist appointments, following what Derek Grossman assessed as an almost certain reversion toward her father's China-accommodating posture. A Sara presidency would likely negotiate the withdrawal of the Typhoon missile system, scale back the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, reduce joint military exercises with the United States and Japan, and allow Chinese vessels to operate with greater impunity in the West Philippine Sea. This would produce a dramatically weakened Philippines in the South China Sea. The 2016 arbitral award, which the Philippines won and which affirmed its exclusive economic zone rights against China's 9-line claim, would gather dust rather than serve as the basis for assertive diplomacy. Filipino fisherfolk would be left without maritime protection. Philippine energy sovereignty over its offshore gas and oil resources would be compromised, and the country's position as a frontline state in the Indo-Pacific's democratic security architecture would be abandoned. Conclusion: a predictable darkness. What distinguishes this analysis from speculation is the evidentiary weight behind each projection. Sara Duterte has not been accused of these governance failures hypothetically. She has been formally charged with them, audited for them, impeached for some of them, and in the case of her ICC secondary respondency, investigated for the most grave of them. Her behavioral record, from the sheriff assault to the kill threat to the red tagging to the confidential funds scandal, forms a coherent and internally consistent portrait of a leader who views public resources as personal assets, accountability as political persecution, violence as a legitimate governing tool, and democratic institutions as obstacles to be circumvented rather than served. The Philippines has survived cycles of strongman governance, martial law, dynastic plunder, and geopolitical misalignment. It has demonstrated resilience through civil society, the Catholic Church, independent media, and the enduring strength of its people. The 2025 midterm elections showed that Filipino voters remain alert political agents capable of collective moral judgment. But the structural conditions that would enable a Sara Duterte presidency to consolidate power rapidly, an emasculated opposition, a packed Senate ally bloc, a hollowed-out institutional framework, a captured local government network, and a foreign policy that strips the country of its strongest security guarantors are in place or rapidly assembling. The question of what the Philippines would look like under her is not unanswerable. The answer is written in her record. The country would look like Davao City at national scale: loyal, controlled, opaque, and governed for the benefit of a single family and its network, rather than the more than 113 million people who would live under it. I am afraid of that Philippines, and I think you should be too.